Hi, everybody. Just really happy to introduce Crystal Tucker, who will be our moderator this evening. She's just completed the Sustainable Tucson Ambassadors Program. She has studied earthships as an approach to environmental design and is now in her second year of studies at Pima College on the topic of engineering with an environmental focus. So we're really happy to have her here today. As mentioned already, she will be monitoring uh, your chat comments and making sure we all stay on track and having a good time listening to Bob Vint, who I will now let take my chair because we're sharing the room today. Bob Vint is not Stuart Moody, but we're becoming good friends already. So here we go.
Right. Thank you, Stuart. All right. Well, so let's see, Crystal, did you want to get me started with sharing screen, or do you have any other thoughts to share before we launch?
Just a little introduction about you, actually. I know that you are a native Tucsonian and you are a licensed architect who also worked on the mission in San Javier. But you are also a co author on the book Southwest Housing Traditions, where you do a mix of new and old technology to solve some of the modern issues that we're facing with housing, correct?
That's right. Yes, all of that is all of the above. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah, that is all that I would like to say. I would
Okay.
love to get started.
So let's all see if I can figure out how to share screen. Let's see. Ta-da. Video, learn more. I don't see share screen. Do we have share screen enabled? Oh, here's share. I had to expand the view. Okay, there we are. Let's see. Are we launched? Can everyone see the first slide here?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good. Well, we'll launch into this. Um, So yes, as Crystal mentioned, I am an architect and I grew up here in Tucson from age 4, so I think that makes me a native. I actually was born at Fort Huachuca, southeast of here, but so I'm a lifelong southeastern Arizonian and went to the U of A for architecture and have worked, and I now teach at the U of a class on arid region urbanism, um, which is an elective, and we do field trips. And so basically this presentation is an amalgamation of a couple of things. One, it's the book that I put together for housing urban development that Crystal mentioned, Southwest Housing Traditions, and it's sort of mashed up with two of my lectures that I've developed for my class. So what we're looking at here is the town of Arispe, Sonora, on the Rio Sonora Valley, south of Douglas, Agua Prieta. And it's just a beautiful natural and actually unnatural area. There's lots of agriculture, a lot of farming and ranching along the Rio Sonora. But the urban form is exemplary, I think, and is one of the things that I included in the book I co-authored. Urban form being, of course, the shape of the city. Is it made up of row houses or courtyard houses or detached single-family suburban houses? Those are the types of criteria we use for urban form. And Arispe, interestingly enough, dates back to the 1600s. And in the cathedral that you see here, in the floor of the cathedral is buried Juan Bautista de Anza, founder of the city of San Francisco, California. He was on his way back from founding San Francisco when he took ill and died, and they buried him in the floor here. This was the Spanish colonial capital of Sonora, Chihuahua, New Mexico, and Arizona in northern New Spain. And you can see from this photo that every house has a courtyard. So you have a private outdoor space. Here, a map of our region, the border region, this 2,000 plus mile long border between the US and Mexico. The Sonoran Desert is mostly in Sonora, not surprisingly. This is the book that came out actually 20 years ago, but since it addresses ideas and traditions that are hundreds of years old, I still consider the book relevant. It's relatively recent, because some of the ideas in it are maybe 600 years old. So, and the idea is to look at those examples from the past that make sense for the present and future. And to some degree, I think we might find our future in the past by looking at things that work and are sustainable. And of course, the definition of sustainable being, can you keep doing what you're doing? Um, and I think to a large extent, much of what's happening in Tucson right now in terms of the suburban sprawl development is inherently unsustainable. So we've got to begin, well, we have begun turning the corner and filling in and being more efficient. But this is the course that I've been teaching now, since 2014. So what's that, 11 years? Prior to that, I taught a large required history course, but for the last 11 years, I've been teaching this seminar with field trips. And these are some of the places we go on the little, this is a course flyer I use to publicize the course. And the topics that we address are, I think, all the topics that this group is concerned with. Um, of course, everything begins with where we are on Earth. I'm sure some of you recognize this as the grasslands down towards Sonoyta. Those are the Mustang Mountains. We're seeing, of course, in August after the rains. And when I show this slide to my students and I ask them to guess where the photo was taken, some of them will say, "Oh, it looks like Ireland, somewhere really green." And then you see the little stalks of the yucca in the foreground, and you realize, no, it's actually the Empire Ranch. We have if we manage our water well, we would have enough water for people to live here. Of course, we're dependent upon the CAP coming from the Colorado and like Mead. There's the infamous bathtub ring, which has grown even taller now as the water diminishes in our reservoir that sustains both Phoenix and Tucson. And the irony, of course, of the whole Central Arizona project is that it was sold to the voters 50 years ago as a farm rescue project for agriculture in Southern Arizona. And my father-in-law, Bill Martin, actually did a paper back in the 70s analyzing the CAP from the point of view of the farmer. He was an agricultural economist at U of A. And he said, by the time the water gets down to Southern Arizona, it's going to be so expensive, the farmers won't buy into the irrigation district. They'll keep pumping groundwater. And then they'll put the CAP water in the pipes for the city. And at the time, all the people who were pushing the CAPs denied it. Oh, no, we would never do that. So, of course, that's I think it was Claude Coburn who said, never believe anything until it is officially denied. So, of course, everything transpired as my father-in-law predicted it would. He was in retirement in 1999. The Daily Star called him up and said, "Professor Martin, do you feel vindicated? Everything came true just like you thought it would." He goes, "No, I don't feel vindicated. I knew I was right." So I have some direct ties to that history. Bill Martin was a great guy. We live in one of the most beautiful desert regions on Earth. This is the beginning. This is the trailhead of the Finger Rock Trail, which once you go around that little corner in the canyon, you wouldn't even know the city is here, but so unique and so beautiful. And yet this is the city that we've built. This is a question I've been asking since childhood. How did we build such an ugly city in such a beautiful place? Well, there are multiple answers, but this was printed in Life magazine when I was 10 years old, that the ugliest street in Tucson, well, I'm sorry, the ugliest street in the entire country was Speedway in Tucson. When I actually disagreed with that. I thought North First Avenue was even uglier, but this was the environment in which I was raised and always thought, and I actually grew up on the east side of Tucson, and so I was a suburban kid. And you look at the kinds of buildings that we build here, and you say, why? Well, there are answers. When what we had was this. This is of the Spanish and Mexican period. This is how Tucson was up until urban renewal. I know this is on a street that no longer exists. It's down south of Broadway. We're looking at the end of the street at the Santa Rita Hotel, which also doesn't exist anymore. All of this was torn down. So what can you say about a city that tears out its heart? Now, how many of y'all have seen this history of Tucson, the People's Urban History? It was published nearly 50 years ago by a very interesting guy, Jody Gibbs, an architect, who had a nonprofit advocacy and urban design and architecture firm called the Tucson Community Development Design Center. And when I was a student, I started working there. And this analysis, frankly, really shaped my perception. And when I found this little comic book history of Tucson, I thought, wow, finally someone's telling the truth about Tucson. We could see Jody was nothing. He was not subtle. The city of Tucson is being devoured by a greedy, real estate, what have you. The comic book is really intelligently written. It's ironic, it's sardonic, it's hilarious at times. And I think it's still true. I don't know if you can read some of this stuff. I actually could send this to your membership as a Google Drive link. So here's a young couple back in the 70s saying, we'd like to get a small lot for a little adobe house that doesn't use much water or energy. And the planning guy said, I am sorry, it's against the law. Our zoning ordinances, our building codes, and our setback requirements don't allow it. Can I interest you in a 7,000 square foot R1 lot with a split level conquistador model, solid plastic with an air conditioned front yard and a waterfall? I mean, this is hilarious. Jody was a very funny guy, except when he wasn't, but that's another story. And this is so true. In the lower left, leisure time is very often no more than violent miseducation, more true than ever. So he was on it. And so, anyway, the suburban middle class, which I grew up in, we Anglos get cracker box houses with planned obsolescence and so on. Jody was a social critic. Back in the 70s, the CAP had not yet arrived. So Jody had this whole analysis of the water problem. You have the aquifer that's being drained mainly by the mines and agribusiness. And all of this stuff is quite true. Tucson's been continuously inhabited for 11,000 years. Optimistic estimates suggest we have 100 years of water left. That's less than 1% of our time. Pretty close to the end. But wait, we have a democratic system, etc. We have such a democratic system, it permits the rich with all their money to win the elections. All right, you could tell where Jody's coming from. But you know what? He was right about so many things. Here's a view of Tucson as it was 50 years ago. And then here's the developer's vision for Tucson in the future, which is pretty much what we're getting with some small pockets of resistance, which we'll talk about here. And here we, the business class, want to bulldoze the common people and the desert in the name of business. We, the liberal faction, want to bulldoze the common people and leave the cactus in the name of ecology. Okay, Jody was quite critical. But if we go back far enough in this region, this desert region of the southwestern United States, there was architecture that was designed for the climate by people who understood the climate and how to live in it. This is in northern New Mexico, actually not far from Farmington. It's the Spanish named it Pueblo Bonito, beautiful town, because it was an impressive work of urban architecture, completely environmentally designed. They tucked their little village, which was basically a whole community, as one big unit down at the bottom of this mesa, because up in northern New Mexico, it gets cold and the wind comes whipping down. So they tucked their village up against the cliff face, so it's out of the wind, the north wind, and it gets the south sun.
The
And
North Wind.
I beg pardon? Hello? Do we have a comment?
I
Okay.
think someone's mic was on.
Oh, okay. So anyway, the people who built this town knew that if you faced your building south, the sun would warm it in the winter. And then when the sun is higher in the summer, you have less heat gain. And they also built community space for ceremonies, and the circular subterranean buildings are thought to be kivas. Another example of Native American architectural genius is at Mesa Verde, the Cliff Palace, where they built their town in the shade of a cliff, completely sheltered from the north wind, and in the summertime, receiving ample solar warmth. And then, of course, water was seeping down through the stone, so they actually had seeps where you could drink the water. It had been stone filtered. So these towns. Now, the disadvantage of a cliff dwelling is that every now and then a big rock lets loose from the alcove above you and comes crashing down. But so these fabulous examples of architecture persisted for hundreds of years. Eventually, with climate change and other factors, social factors, these civilizations rose and then declined. And as my brother's an archaeologist, he says people didn't just die out; they moved away to other places to continue living. This is Acoma Sky City, up west of Albuquerque. Fabulous urban design. All these row houses of essentially terraced apartments facing southeasterly. It's actually adjusted to face, I think, 15 degrees east of south, which is optimum for winter solar gain. You want more solar gain in the winter morning to warm you up, and then you get less solar gain in the summer afternoon because you're shaded by the buildings. The Spanish came and built a church, St. Stephen's, I believe. This was the scene of one of the Pueblo rebellions in 1680, when the native people rose up and actually tossed the priest off the cliff. Of course, the Spanish came back a few years later and punished the native people pretty severely. This is amazing solar architecture. south-facing terraces built of flagstone, which would warm up in the sun. And then this zigzagging wall that's in between the units. A lot of people do kind of a little zigzag southwestern detail on their frame and stucco houses. At Acoma Pueblo, that was actually a privacy wall. It let sun in to your neighbor, but also gave you greater privacy. So it was a design element that was functional both for human society and also for solar gain. Here's a cross section of Acoma Pueblo, 3 stories high, 3-story stone building laid with mud mortar. The floors were timber with laths and heavy branches, and then flagstone. They had stone floors, just fabulous architecture, and it worked. Winter and summer, you'd open the roof hatches at different times. Of course, they had no stairs. Everything was by ladders, and you came down through the roof. But all of this has been studied, and of course, the tradition is that the walls are remudded, I think semi-annually to keep the building, which is what you have to do with organic materials. You have to restore them. They're always coming and going. And then, of course, in southern Arizona, we have our Casa Grande, best translated as Great House, and it impressed the Spanish when they arrived in the 1690s. On the left is the first sketch of the Casa Grande that we know of. It was done by Lieutenant Manje, who traveled with Kino, and he was impressed with the architecture. It's essentially 4 stories, if you count the roof terrace as a 4th story. And the floor plan is designed. It's clearly a work of architecture. It's intentional. And it was part of a compound the Great House was the centerpiece of a whole village as it looked in the late 1800s, as it looks now. My grandfather was a landscape architect, and he had a hand in planning the National Historic Monument at Casa Grande, including this canopy to protect the building from the elements. Now, what happened? The building actually was in much better shape until the 1890s, when Anglo ranchers moved in and pulled all the roof beams out to build their ranch houses, which hastened the deterioration of this 800-year-old Native American monument. So thankfully, it's protected by the Park Service now. Here's a plan of the Great House in its larger context. There was a whole village here of earthen architecture, and all that cross-hatched area that you see on the screen, that's all unexcavated. There's buildings under there. We know that this was a walled town. Think about it, a walled town, the 1200s and the 1300s in southern Arizona on the Gila River. And this is actually from the HUD book I put together, which was the Southwest Housing Traditions Design, Materials, Performance. So I started with Native American architecture, the oldest in our region. So I hit the highlights. What makes this building interesting? The thick earthen walls, the simple rectangular shapes, for simplicity of construction, compact building to reduce exposure to the elements, small openings. All of these are things that we can learn from. This is a summary of the principles of urban design that were used pre-contact by the native people who were here. Solar orientation, self-shading building forms, higher density, leaves more land for farming, all good ideas, and we can learn from. Now, on the other hand, then there's this. And we have a border that runs through our land. This is a public art on the border at Nogales. Here is a book I recommend that if you're interested in following up on these topics, by a Dutch architect, Johan van Lengen. He called it Manuel del Arquitecto Descalzo, the handbook of the barefoot architect. And in it, it's full of great diagrams that show, well, this is how you should build in a humid area. This is how you should build in a dry, hot area. So we're tropico seco. And these are all the principles of building that we should follow and unfortunately seldom do. Of course, the Spanish got the whole courtyard idea from the Arabs, from the Muslims, who were in Spain from 711 until 1492. So they deeply imbued that culture. This is the border at Douglas, Arizona to the left, and Agua Prieta, Sonora on the right. And I'm delving into this a little bit because it came out in the little announcement of my talk. And the first version of the talk was I got a little, I guess it got a little mixed up because Stewart had looked on the website of the College of Architecture, and a student had done a little article with KUAZ and had a few things got mixed up. It said that we designed the house that we built. We didn't design the house. The house was pre-designed, and it also said how it was a super environmental house. Well, I would say not exactly. What it is, it's a very economical and simple to build house that um, relatively unskilled people such as architects and architecture students can actually build it. It's a conventional frame house, and I'll tell you why. The advantage of frame is that it can be insulated. A lot of the houses in the poorer neighborhoods of Agua Prieta, the colonias, are built of uninsulated cinder block, and they're durable, but boy, do they get cold in the winter. And in fact, one of the volunteers from this group I'm working with was very moved by an experience he had. He was visiting one of the poor neighborhoods, and he saw a large group of people gathered outside a cement block home. And he stopped to see what was happening, and they were holding a wake for a 2-year-old girl who had died of hypothermia because their house got so cold. It's 4,000 feet above sea level. In the winter, it gets well below freezing, and people are, cooking and they're boiling water to stay warm. Ice forms on the inside of the cinder block walls because it's uninsulated and it freezes. So anyway, he said, I'm going to develop a design that can be insulated so the children won't freeze to death. So this is the group I've been volunteering with the last 5 years. And I have to tell you, I'm a native Tucsonan, so of course I have a chip on my shoulder about people from Phoenix, especially people from Scottsdale, who I thought were a bunch of snobs. Well, I am completely wrong, and I've completely reformed my prejudices and rejected them. The most generous, good-hearted guy is a fellow named Gil Gillenwater, and he started this Agua Prieta charitable. He calls it Rancho Feliz, silly name, Happy Ranch, but he has organized a group of supporters who fund this operation, and they've built. Well, our group from U of A, we built the 56th house in one of the neighborhoods. And this is the first thing I did for them was I worked on the design of this dormitory for volunteers who come down. Though they also distribute healthy food to neighborhoods. And Anyway, they're a good bunch of people, and it's been really great working with them. Here's a site plan. Oh, check out their website, ranchofeliz.com. And it's a traditional courtyard building. We've got dormitories across the north for men and women, a dozen in each room. So we could actually sleep, because they're bunk beds, we could sleep, I think, 48 student volunteers. Then there's 6 hotel rooms basically for faculty and chaperones. We have a dining hall, we have a kitchen, we have meeting rooms. It's quite a compound. Here's a larger floor plan. The courtyard is something I advocate for greatly for the future of architecture. I think the courtyard is the answer for many, many needs. So we have on one side the kitchen, comedor, cocina, bathrooms, showers, of course, and then these bedrooms. And this is it being built, very solidly built with a locally produced concrete block. We brought the trusses up down from, actually, it is up to the border. We brought them up to the border because there is no timber industry really in Mexico. And these prefab trusses proved to be the most economical way to build the roof. And we tiled it with mission tile. And here's some cross sections that we figured out. The trusses in the dining room, I have to admit, I completely ripped off from the design at the Arizona Inn in the library. My old teacher, Judith Chafee, when I confessed to her I had stolen a design element from another architect, she said, it's not stealing to learn. So I remembered. So I learned these trusses from the Arizona Inn, and there they are. We did line the inside of the dining hall with burned adobe to make the walls thicker and give it a more traditional feel. Then my client, Gil, ended up deciding to have it painted to brighten up the room. So in the evenings, I guess it was too dark for them. But this is actually my group when we were down to do the building. And they lined up a mariachi for us in the evening. And the fellow in the foreground, the slightly balding fellow, is Ryan Smith, who's the director of the School of Architecture, and his wife, Lindsay. And they came along and worked with their crew to put up the house. The vault entering into the courtyard. Here's the central courtyard. Again, I had designed a slightly less rustic building, but Gil wanted it to really feel like an old hacienda. So he and his contractor, Desarrollos Constructivos of Agua Prieta, went down the Rio Sonora and brought back big mesquite posts. So the building got a little more, I don't know, rustic than I had intended it to be, but it's still pretty great. And the courtyard just feels good at any time of day or night. And I have to admit that the rooms for the chaperones are basically luxury hotel rooms. What was going to be a water tower ended up being an observation deck because the city brought. But this is the reason for this whole operation is that people are living, a lot of people are living in really precarious conditions, and Gil was very moved to do something about it. They also do things where they bring piñatas into the poor neighborhoods, and this picture here, this particular slide on the right is the family that's going to live in the little house that we put up in March. And the kids are here waiting in line to do the piñata. And I have to tell you, I've got a 2-year-old granddaughter now, and the daughter in the family that's going to live in the house. And when I asked the family if I could take their picture, the little girl started waving, and she reminds me so much of my own granddaughter, so much. Just everything about her, and it would be heartbreaking to think, my granddaughter living in such conditions, but this house will actually be an improvement in where she's been living. Now, the houses are tiny. They're 20 by 20. They're wood frame. They're going to be insulated and sheetrocked. Our crew basically did rough framing. We got the walls up. We got the roof on. We got it sided. We got windows installed. And then our group will be followed up by a team of actually qualified plumbers and electricians and plasterers who will finish off the house. So this is what one of the finished houses looks like. Propane for cooking. If there's not electricity available in the area where they're building, they do solar panels on the roof. Plumbing is by septic. They put the septic in. All of that was done before we got there. The slab was in place, the septic was in place. So essentially, we came down for 4 days to put up the house. And part of the Rancho Feliz approach is they want Americans to learn more about the border and the conditions on the border, which helps you also understand the immigration question. It's like why people would be so motivated to immigrate when factory wages in on the border are something like $10 to $14 a day, and it's legal to pay people that. It used to be lower. A few years ago, it was $5 a day. It was legal minimum wage in Mexico. The previous president AMLO doubled the minimum wage, from $5 a day to $10 a day. Still doesn't get very far. So there's another side of the coin that Gil's very honest about it. He says, well, if people can stay in their own country, then they won't immigrate. So, and people don't really want to leave their country and their culture and their families behind and have to go, work in the north for a living. So he's trying to address these problems. This is our group. Actually, this was a larger group with the Rancho Feliz staff as well. And it's a very, it's definitely a feel-good operation. And Gil and Water doesn't, mince words. He goes, uh, he says, Bob, I do this because it makes me feel good. He says, I'm the most selfish person on earth. I like helping people because I feel good when I help people. He says, all right, Gil, this is enlightened self-interest, and he's got some kind of a Buddhist philosophy. He hiked in Tibet, and it's just a very interesting guy, and I hope you can meet him. So these are some other house types that now we're kind of going back to my book. I mashed this up once the confusion about our week in Agua Prieta. I wanted to set the record straight on that. This is a view of a saguan. A saguan is a traditional entrance hall in Spanish housing, Mexican housing, that goes right through the house from the back garden out to the street. This little house happens to be in Ures, Sonora, and I visited there to document some vernacular housing types for the HUD book. And you can see here, the saguan is the coolest space in the house because it has a cooling breeze coming off the courtyard. The courtyard you hit with plants. The street is sunny and paved rather. So the warm air rises off the street. It pulls the moist, cool air off the garden through the house. And that's the same technique that was used at the Alhambra in the courtyards of the caliphs in Granada at the Alhambra. They would have a pavilion. On one side was a paved courtyard, and the other was a garden. And you could sit in the shade of your pavilion, and you'd have a evaporatively cooled breeze. Here's a Saguan house in Tucson. You can see essentially that central hallway acts as it's the air conditioning duct that takes air all through the house. And this is on South Meyer Avenue in Tucson. Thick walls, high ceilings, beautiful proportions of the walls. So I looked at different types of traditional houses in the region. The L-shaped courtyard house, this is one of the oldest houses in Tucson. It shows up in some Here's another type of house. It's also with the art museum, Fish Stevens Duffield. That's a big adobe fortress. But look at it's actually made up of several different types of houses. You can see a saguan house that was joined to another house and a U-shaped house, and all the rooms are together. I ended up calling this a cellular house because it seemed like it grew like by cell division. Um, and there it is. Again, it's a fortress on the outside, right? Because it's defending you from the fierce west sun. And then on the inside, it's a garden. And that's the Alhambra. The Alhambra is a fortress on the outside and a palace on the inside. This is the type of urbanism that you get when you do that type of row house. This is also in Ures. So, no, this is not Ures. This is Aconchi, Sonora, on the Rio Sonora, the U-shaped house. So then I did some prototypical plans based on the vernacular examples I'd seen. And these are all built to HUD standards as far as how much counter space and how much, closet space, and a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and a certain square footage. It could be built out of adobe or rammed earth or straw bale. There's an L-shaped house with the same criteria. Um, this is how the houses can be grouped together. This is all in the HUD study, so I won't be over the invite you to look up the HUD book. Go to that website, huduser.org. Search the title. You can download the book as a PDF or even order one, and they'll mail it to you for free eventually. It takes a while. Here's how you group a bunch of L-shaped houses together. And this was a study I did for an infill project where I used a mix of the L-shaped prototypes, U-shaped prototypes, and then a row house prototype. I also it developed where you would keep the cars to the outside of the development. The inside is all garden or playground. Yeah. So here's a built example using those same principles on South Main Avenue. It's for David and Billy Hardy. I met Billy Hardy at the Desert Museum. I was doing work there. She was on the board there. So it's a saguan plan with a courtyard. We put the cars in back. There's also a row house, kind of shotgun house for a guest. And I wanted them to build 2 L-shaped houses east, entered off South 9th Avenue in the barrio. Those never got built, but the potential was there for the lot. These are some views of the design. Again, the fortress principle. And the L-shaped courtyards have the courtyard on the southeast corner to welcome the morning light, and then in the afternoon you would have shade. This is how it was built, traditional brick cap. The adobe is actually cement stabilized. The house is holding up pretty well. It's, gosh, I think we finished this 1990. When is that? 26 years ago. And the whole principle of the house is the biggest room in the house is the courtyard, and all the rooms look into it. And that also helps cool the house. In the interior, the owners furnish it very traditionally. We brought in some east light above the kitchen at the end of the living dining, so that that's one thing with thick walls and small windows. You could end up with a dim interior. Here's the house in construction. The guy in the middle with the sunglasses, Eric Means, really great contractor I've worked with for many years. Here's the cross section. Now, this is in the HUD book too. When you build with adobe, you do need to reinforce it against lateral forces, either wind or earthquake. And so we actually used a concrete foundation and a concrete block parapet wall that we then veneered with adobe. So I'm giving away trade secrets here. But the building's holding up quite well. Traditionally, adobe was unreinforced, but we are actually in a seismic area. So part of the book was to analyze the materials, and adobe and rammed earth were materials I looked at. We looked at them for compressive strength. And let's see, we had both the maximum load that it could take and then the average strength, both for rammed earth and adobe. I also looked at the energy content of the materials in terms of how much fossil fuel energy had to go into making the material. So steel, 55,000 kilowatt hours per cubic meter, which is roughly a cubic yard. Earth, 5 to 10 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. So Earth has one 10,000th of what it takes to make steel. Another reason to use Earth. And we measured the strength wet and dry in rammed earth. And we looked at the thermal lag behavior of adobe, because adobe is not particularly a good insulator, but it is a good thermal mass. And the idea is you cool it down at night and then it helps get you through the day. And that's how traditionally the houses, people, pre-air conditioning, your house had to be your air conditioner, right? In your garden. And now here's a new material that I've been using in the last couple of years. And I've designed 4 buildings of this material. I'd like to find a way to use this material in Agua Prieta. It would depend upon the manufacturer donating the blocks, but it's a material called the Perfect Block. It's made up in the Phoenix area, and it's a lightweight block. The aggregate is ground up post-consumer styrofoam that's in a cement matrix, and they mold it into these jumbo blocks. They're 4 feet long by 12 inches high by 10 inches wide. And you stack them and actually just glue them together, and then you grout them solid. And what you end up with is an insulated thermal mass, which is the ideal thing to have. And this particular house, which I designed for a high school friend in the Tucson Mountains, he says in the wintertime, he never has to run any heat. In the summer, he runs air conditioning very little, but his utility bills are next to nothing for this highly insulating and thermal mass wall product. And the Masons loved it because they just stacked it so easily. They didn't put their backs out, and the work goes very quick. And I think it's a really promising material. It's a little more expensive than concrete block. It does have to be stuccoed on the outside. Here you see on the right-hand side is the finished porch. Um, and on the inside, we actually just, you push sheetrock onto it. You actually put drywall compound on the sheetrock and push it against the wall, and that adheres it to the wall. But I think it's a promising material. So I'm just about to get to the final stretch here. I'm going to show some examples of what I think are really exemplary infill developments. And this one was actually done a few years ago, but it's very worth looking at. And I think it sets a good example, designed by a good friend of mine, Arthur Perkins, who now lives in Paris. Um, the one in France. He left Tucson for love. He got married and now lives in Paris. But he designed the 15th Street and Highland Avenue studios. And it's maybe I could use the mouse as a little arrow key here. So we're talking about this project. Let's see.
Close.
I'm close.
It's off. It's over there.
There it is. So let's go. So here's the larger area. This is the big retention pond that was built as part of the Arroyo Chico, our Army Corps of Engineers project. This is Arthur's project, which is a really interesting plan. It has a central pedestrian spine, we would call it, and there are 6 artist residences with studios that you access off the spine. Parking is down here in the corner, community garden here, and each unit has a double height living room and then a bedroom upstairs above the kitchen and bath. So they're just classic kind of artist studios. He got this published in the National Journal, Progressive Architecture, which is not an easy thing to do. Here's some more recent aerials I just got off of Pima GIS. You can see that it's really grown up well with vegetation. Another view from the northwest. It's created a whole little microclimate. There it is right when it was finished. He just used exposed concrete block, but you can see he had deep overhangs on all the windows. And in the wintertime, they get a lot of sun. Here's a second project that Arthur did around the corner at Manlove Avenue at Santa Rita. This, again, 6 artist studios. These actually, the studio is joined to let's see, how does that work? Oh, there's a stair up to a loft above the kitchen. There's a bedroom and a bathroom on the ground floor. So they're a mix of 1 and 2 stories. And here you can see 3 here and 3 here, and they're grouped to create a courtyard. And he parks on the corner here, he parks on the corner here, you come into a courtyard. And there you see this little enclave. It creates a, central focus. There's Bertie. That's why we lost Arthur to Paris. And that's Arthur's son, Jacques Perkins. Here's a view of the studio, double height. So that's classic, Le Corbusier artist studio. Another really great project that some of you are likely to be familiar with is the Sonoran co-housing community. And I have a couple of good friends who live here. And I also take my students on field trips here to see what a good infill development looks like. This is East Roger Road off of First Avenue. You've got there was an old adobe on the property which they saved, which I think is this one over here. And then this became, it's co-housing. So they have a community room, a common room, they have common facilities, a wood shop, they've got a teenager room, so the teenagers can rock out, I guess. And then they built these two-story row houses along pedestrian streets. Again, all the cars are kept outside the community. And this was a particularly, I think, really great idea that their planners came up with, which is the city of Tucson ordinarily requires a fire truck loop around a property. I'm looking at the apartments next door, they don't seem to have one. So that tells me that this apartment building was built before that requirement was in place, because the modern development plans require a 20-foot minimum fire lane that would have come all the way around here. And instead of doing that, they made this the community gardens and water catchment. And what they did is they have a place for the fire trucks to do a Y turn and pull out. And they also had fire sprinklers installed in this back row of dwellings. Um, and this is a little analysis of how it works. 36 units, 100 residents, pedestrian emphasis, and community gardens. The students really dig the gardens because they have chicken coops, and you can get fresh eggs. And then when the hens stop laying, you can get fresh chicken. And the units are, they're 2 stories, which is, efficient land use. My friend Julie Freiberg, who's a teacher, she teaches with my wife Jane, always gives us a nice tour. Um, it was published pretty widely when it was first built um, in case studies. And there we are. That was in the Daily Star. But of course, co-housing is what they call an intentional community. Everybody who lives there does so. They choose to be there to be part of a community. And it's not for everyone, but I think the design is really good. I actually was interested in being part of this, but my wife is more of a keeps to herself sort. She's not the outgoing sort, so she vetoed that. But we do have friends there, and it's quite an impressive thing. This is the central green area that also doubles as a rain catchment area, as a water retention basin in a big storm. So I would just say a very successful example of uh, of uh, of infill design and development, and it's really great eccentric people who live here, and the gardens and the chickens, and altogether a successful urban infill project. So these are the things that I had to share with Sustainable Tucson um, at this time, and so I will put a sock in it and listen to comments or questions or
We
whatever.
have two questions in the chat. So the first one is from Dan. Is there any issue with outgassing from the perfect blocks? That's always been a concern with me with plastic blocks, like these or by blocks.
So I think because it's post-consumer recycled styrofoam, basically it's ground up styrofoam cups. And they've been in the environment for a while, and I think have done a lot of what off-gassing they're going to do. The other thing that happens is that it's not that high in styrofoam content. There's some blocks that are just all foam, pure foam. This is essentially substituting foam granules for sand and gravel in a cement block, and they're super lightweight. And so I'm not sure what percentage foam they are versus cement, but once they're in place and once they're grouted, they feel absolutely solid. You can pound on them, and it feels like cement block wall. Prior to that time, they're kind of flaky. You do have to stucco them, and you have to sheetrock them. So I think once they're in place and stuccoed and finished, I, in terms of the interior of the house, I think the off-gassing I don't believe is significant. But I haven't done the testing, and I don't know whether the Perfect Block has done the testing. But that would be a good question for the manufacturer.
Right. We also have a question from Laura. It seems a few of us live in uninsulated block or brick homes. Can you make any specific suggestions as to minimally or modestly priced materials or methods for adding insulation, perhaps to the exterior of our homes?
Yes, yes. I also live in an uninsulated double brick house, which has its advantages. In the fall and the spring, it works great. The walls sort of average out the highs and lows. My house also, thankfully, is oriented. It runs east-west, so it doesn't get a lot of west sun, and it has a nice shade porch. So it works pretty well. But when it heats up, it heats up. The thing with masonry, when it gets cold, it stays cold. When it gets hot, it stays hot. So in terms of insulating, for a couple of clients, I have specified exterior insulation, which would be a rigid styrofoam that is shot on with big powder driven what do they call them? Powder driven anchors, the big washer, so that the thing you shoot doesn't shoot through this foam, and then lath it and then plaster it. But the trouble is, then if you have an old brick home, you lose the effect of the brick. Um, but in terms of environmental or economic advantage, you want to insulate the thermal mass on the exterior so that the mass assumes the temperature of the interior. Um, so now some brick buildings and block buildings are furred out on the inside. Now they're insulated, but you've also cut your thermal mass off from your interior environment, which is a trade-off. So actually, I think David Eisenberg did something pretty neat. He insulated a blockhouse with straw bales on the outside, which of course you need the extra space to have a thick wall. But a thick wall is a pretty nice thing in our bright sunshine climate, I should say, because it helps modulate the glare of the sun to have a thick wall, like the old Adobes are really thick walled. So that might, and then also you don't have the foam question. Um, but I don't think there's any perfect answer to that. But I agree. The other way, of course, is as my father-in-law used to say, shade trees, cool buildings, plant an air conditioner today.
Perfect. Another question. Have you ever used rock wool board for exterior insulation?
No, I haven't. I've used Rockwell insulation um, for acoustical purposes in ceilings, and Rockwell has been around for a long time. I understand it's actually a byproduct from the manufacture of asbestos. I think that's the case. Read that somewhere sometime. But it is an alternative to fiberglass, certainly. And fiberglass, I think, is probably the next material to be banned because it's really horrible stuff, and the installers, breathe it. And if it's in roofing, and the workers breathe it. Actually, my grandson's Little League coach has been having terrible health problems. He's a roofer, and he's been, he's been doing asphalt fiberglass shingles for 30 years, and boy, is he a mess. His whole sinuses are just filled with fiberglass, and he's an absolute wreck. So fiberglass is unhealthy, and I think we'll probably go the way of asbestos one day. I hope so.
Yeah. Sandy is saying, I recently heard of a group experimenting with making adobe and buffalo grass instead of straw. Do you know anything about this experiment?
I don't, but I like the sound of it. Sounds like a great way to get rid of buffalo grass. Oh, actually, my grandson, whom I mentioned, Henry is his name, he did his science fair project on Adobe and different stabilizers and just used stuff around his house, including mesquite bean pods. He thought that might do something. He used Bermuda grass trimmings. And one other thing I can't think of, and I actually had nothing to do with this experiment. I was not involved at all. But he made the bricks and he tested them for strength and water resistance. And he actually won third place in the SARSEF science fair for his Adobe experiment. So
It looks like he's starting on this question.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Now I know there's also some hempcrete is being used
Mm.
currently, and I had a person who was marketing that come by my office and give us a demonstration of it. But the system she was using, you actually have to build a frame house and then pour the hempcrete in between the studs. It was, and I'm not sure if there's another way to use that, but that looked like actually quite a healthful type of insulation and also effective.
Yeah. And that seems honestly kind of cool. I'm like, imagine being able to say that your house was molded. Like, that is just crazy concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one material that I remain highly suspicious of is spray foam insulation,
Mm.
which people have started to use now. That is got it off gas massively. if you use that stuff, you'd probably have to let your house stand open for a year before you want to move in. So that, but people use it because it's super highly insulating, with 6 inches, you could get an R38, whereas you need, 12 inches of another insulation type. The cotton batting insulation is nice, the Ultra Touch made of recycled blue jeans, but it has to be kept dry. If it gets any water in, it starts to rot, and which is why people use fiberglass because it's impervious, but it kills you, but it's impervious. I don't know.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but I did have some questions about the
Oh,
courtyard. Could you
yeah.
go in a little bit about like the details of how exactly it could provide an air conditioning room for you?
So a courtyard is an ancient idea. You can find it in China, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. You could find it in India. You can find it in Arabia, and you can find it in Spain and Latin America. Now, I don't know whether the idea was just developed independently by different people living in arid regions, or whether the concept spread from China to these other areas. A lot of ideas did spread from China. In fact, one of my professors from years ago, Jorge Herrera, had analyzed the history of bracketed wooden architecture, which we know as the corbel, which we got from the Mexicans and they got it from the Spanish. And he traced that first the earliest bracketed architecture was in China, from where it spread to India, from where it spread to Persia, from where it spread to Arabia, to Spain, to the New World. So, the courtyard too could have traveled with the corbel. But the idea of a courtyard is you capture a small part of the outdoors. So rather than say putting your house in the middle of the lot, having a big front yard and a big backyard and a side yard, you put your outdoor space in the middle of the house and it's private. And you could also just really sock it with plants and a fountain and cool it down. So you don't try to air condition the front yard, as Jody said in the urban history. You create a microclimate, which is contained in the center of your house. Now it does need airflow, so it doesn't become stuffy or static. And usually what you'll have is that's what the saguan is for, right? And you to have an outlet and get airflow, you also need an inlet, right? Air out, air in. So all that has to be planned. Um, but if you look at the traditional courtyards in Spain or Latin America, they are it's the heart of the house, right? And I have friends in Guadalajara and Mexico City who have old courtyard houses, and they're so great. Like on the street, you have rooms and on the street, you'd come through a saguan onto a corredor, which is a covered outdoor passageway, and you have a courtyard. Then you go through another passageway, and there's a second courtyard. Then you go through another passageway, there's a third courtyard, and you could have three generations of a family living in one house. And in fact, my friend in Guadalajara is a dental. She makes dentures. She's I guess, dental technician. Her office is on the front, on the street. She works out of the house, and her brother is a cardiologist, and he works out of the house. And and the father lives there, and the grandson lives there. And on Sunday afternoons, they meet in the third courtyard where the lemon tree grows, and they play music. They play guitars, and the older people are teaching the younger people to play guitar, and they call it El Club del Limoncillo, the lemon tree club. It's a beautiful thing, and the courtyard is a beautiful thing, and it creates again that not only a microclimate, but again, it's a symbolic center of the house and the family.
Yeah. All right. Like, yeah, I'm not seeing any hands or any more questions.
I just got a question handed to me on a slip of paper, the old analog way. And actually, it's a great question. So I'm sure you all know David Eisenberg,
Mhm.
who I've only known for about 30 years. Um, and David gives guest lectures in my class at the U. And whenever he appears, the students are so excited because they're waiting for the kind of knowledge that he has. And they all hang around afterwards and talk to him. And they all want their picture taken with him because they realize there's somebody like really knowledgeable and special. And here's a question from Stuart. Are you aware of David Eisenberg's work developing a code for hempcrete? Um, I have to confess I'm not, but I should be. I know David's so active with his DCAT. I know he's done a lot to get Earth and I mean the building officials keep trying to write Adobe out of the code and rammed Earth, and David's done a lot working on the Code Council to keep Adobe legal. Um, Ditto on his findings: a sustainable, healthy insulation material that outperforms fiberglass. Hmm. Is there such a thing?
I just can't remember what it is.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, when David spoke to my class most recently in October, he did recount how he goes to the Code Council meetings every 6 years, and every time he has to fight to keep natural materials legal, because the conventional code people basically just they don't understand them, and they think old is bad and new is good. So, all right, continuation. Could I describe how Sam Hughes' neighborhood is a model of effective urban development? All right. This is true. When I spoke with Stuart earlier, when I was inviting myself over to his house, he told me where he lived. I thought, wow, you live in the really what is the ideal Tucson neighborhood in terms of its layout. And I actually have a lecture where I look at Sam Hughes and the structure of the blocks, because you have the basic squares, street blocks, but then you have dual alleys. So each square block has two alleys across it, which permits infill development behind the principal buildings. And then you can also have on the north-south streets, you have a street. You don't just have two side yards. You have houses fronting on those north-south streets as well as the east-west streets. So it provides greater density, opportunities for infill. Plus, the neighborhood has a park, a library, a school, and a grocery store. So, I mean, if you tried to plan an ideal urban neighborhood, that's what you would have, all of those things. And you're near a university. But if Tucson had just taken the Sam Hughes model and repeated it block after block, we'd have a much more livable city. But we didn't do it. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't planned by any out of town, expert urban planner. It was, Tucson people who laid it out, city engineer, and then Tucson builders, little by little, filled it in. And the houses are all different. They weren't all built by some national home builder. Just a whole different scale of development. But and there's really a whole variety of really neat buildings in Sam Hughes that I really admire. So it's it's a model to be emulated. And that's my approach also to design and educating students is look at what works and then do that. Just you're not going to go out and try to reinvent the world. And oh, I know one thing I was thinking of dropping into this presentation tonight, and I cut it out for reasons of time, is an analysis of Arcos Santi. Because when I was young and in school, we all thought Paulo Soleri was the bee's knees. And we thought arcologies were so great, and oh man, so beware of cult leaders is all I can say. And that really ended up being a spectacular failure. And Soleri himself also turned out to be a huge disappointment. But so the maybe on a future date I'll give you my arcology analysis. Yeah. And in it, I identify the ultimate arcology, the Death Star. That's a foreshadowing. All right. Well, thanks for your attention and thanks for the invitation to address your group. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. So
Thank you so much.
you're welcome. All right. And I'll email out, I guess probably through Stuart, I'll send out Jody's Urban History of Tucson because frankly, it's a work of genius that deserves to be read. Trace, you must know it. People's Urban
Actually,
History.
I've never seen it. I'm
Oh my
surprised.
goodness. Yeah, I didn't get out there. I first found it, I was a student and I was volunteering at the food co-op, the food conspiracy. They don't emphasize the conspiracy part of their name anymore. But back in the day, you had to volunteer to be a member, right?
Mhm.
Now they actually have hired, professional people working there, which is a good thing. Because some of the things I saw when I was a volunteer made you maybe not want to shop there. But anyway, in this little magazine rack at the food co-op was this newsprint pamphlet, The People's Urban History of Tucson. And I was in my first year of architecture school, and I grabbed it, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I didn't know about the design center yet, and I didn't know about Jody, and I rode my bike all around until I found their address on South Convent. Um, but it's amazing. It bears repeated readings because it's so topical, even to this day. His take on immigration, it's exactly what's happening now. It's amazing. He had a real vision. Um,
We'll
Oh,
look forward to getting that. Could you drop the link to the HUD report, the HUD book?
I sure will. I'll
Okay,
send an email through Stuart. It'll
Okay.
be a Google Drive link because if you send anything on Gmail that's over 25 megs, it turns it into a Google Drive. And the
Uh-huh.
urban history is because it's all color illustrations is more than 25 megs, but you can open it. And then I'll put a link to the HUD book, and I'll put a link to Rancho Feliz.
Oh, great. That'd be wonderful.
Yep. Yep.
Well, on behalf of Sustainable Tucson, I want to thank you for a fascinating thing. A lot of places that I think many of us would love to move to and live in real comfort and pleasant environment. And
Well,
thanks to Crystal for moderating. And if there are no announcements, anything? Stuart, do you want to mention we've got an announcement from Dan for the next water committee meeting on April 27th. We've got that in the chat. And Stuart, you might want to mention the summit.
Yes, I would love to do that. And Dan, consider if you or Jana would like to say what the Water Committee has cooking for that. The Renew Tucson Summit will be next week, April 23rd from 9 to 5, and April 24th from 9 to 1. It's free admission, free lunch, and free snacks in the morning. And we're going to have quite a convocation of thinkers, doers, activists, and folks who just want to see a more thoughtful way of approaching economy, energy, and livable wages in this town and beyond this town. So I'll just read a little blurb from there. It's all about designing desert appropriate policies and practices for resource productivity. Skill development and living wage jobs for residents in 6 major sectors of the economy: agriculture, buildings, energy, industry, water, and there's always one more that comes to mind later. And what the Water Committee has done, really, I think, to the ultimate, is they're gathering a lot of great thinkers to give about half an hour, 45 minutes worth of information, kind of a little bit in the style of Bob, I would say, just full of information and stuff you want to remember. And then we will go in the afternoon into a discussion format led by Catherine Tornbaum and her volunteers from the Center for Community Mediation and Facilitation. Much more to be said. Do check our announcement in the most recent newsletter, and Paula will send that to you if you're not receiving it already.